Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, October 8th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu, and this is the place where we bring you just the facts and we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Another solo edition for you today. Jill is off again today, and she'll be back tomorrow. I mentioned yesterday I was in South Bend, Indiana, and Elkhart, Indiana, working on a partnership with Amazon. We'll have more details for you on that later this week. Though I should mention, it's also Amazon Prime Big Deals Day for another day here. So check out your favorite items or things that have been in your cart for a while because they might be on sale today. All right, with all that said, let's get started with today's headlines. There's a lot to get to, especially out of Washington, where Attorney General Pam Bondi faced heated questioning back and forth yesterday on Capitol Hill with a number of senators over Justice Department policies, over Jeffrey Epstein, over the James Comey indictment, over the White House politicizing the Justice Department, the National Guard deployments. We'll try to get to all the headlines from that testimony. We'll also have an update for you on Texas National Guard troops arriving in Chicago yesterday. Meanwhile, today marks day 8 of the U.S. government shutdown. No end in sight right now. President Trump yesterday suggesting that some federal workers might not receive back pay once this all ends. That might violate a law that he signed several years ago. We'll explain. Explosive text messages are rocking the Virginia Attorney General's race. It's one of the few races we're watching in 2025. The Democrat in the state apologizing after his text messages surfaced, suggesting violence against a Republican. Will he be forced to drop out? The Supreme Court back in session, appearing ready to strike down Colorado's ban on gay conversion therapy. It was framed as a free speech issue yesterday. We'll break it down. An investment that continues to go up in value, gold, hitting a record $4,000 an ounce this week, while investors here in the U.S. and around the world are looking to gold right now. Country singer Bryan facing backlash over a new song criticizing ICE, the White House firing back, and Bryan's response to the response late last night. And TaylorSwift finally explains why she is not doing the Super Bowl halftime show. It came in her interview this week with Jimmy Fallon. We'll have a clip. Plus, of course, I will have On This Day in History on this October 8th. So let's get started here with the intense questioning on Capitol Hill yesterday. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi facing a grilling from Democrats over allegations that she has politicized the Justice Department, including on issues like the Epstein papers, as well as the recent indictment of former FBI Director James Comey. Pam Bondi questioned also on the legality of the National Guard deployments to places like Chicago and Portland. And Pam Bondi taking a cue from her boss yesterday, going on offense during the hearing. She fended off questions left and right using quick one-liners and personal attacks on a number of the Democrats yesterday. It led to a very contentious back and forth. Typically, when cabinet secretaries go onto Capitol Hill and face questions they don't want to answer, they might try to say no comment or pivot to topics they would rather talk about. But Pam Bondi very much mimicking how Trump approaches these confrontations with Democrats, and it happened on a number of issues yesterday. Let's start with the National Guard. Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin pushing Bondi yesterday on the legal rationale for sending Texas National Guard troops to his home state of Illinois against the governor's wishes, his wishes, the mayor of Chicago's wishes, and despite several legal cases, including several judges that have pushed back on the legality of the moves. Well, the Attorney General shot back yesterday as she faced questions from Dick Durbin about this. Take a listen to a bit of that.
Madam Attorney General, let me ask you this question. Were you consulted by the White House before they deployed National Guard troops to cities in the United States?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House.
You won't even say whether you talked to the White House about this?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House with you, Ranking Member.
I noticed that. What's the secret? Why do you want to keep this secret? The American people don't know the rationale behind the deployment of National Guard troops in my state. The word is, and I think it's been confirmed by the White House, they are going to transfer Texas National Guard units to the state of Illinois. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, Chairman, as you shut down the government, you voted to shut down the government, and you're sitting here, our law enforcement officers aren't being paid. They're out there working to protect you. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump.
So that gives you a sense of the tone and tenor of the hearing. Pam Bondi firing back at questions she didn't want to answer with statements like, I wish you love Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And that really set the tone for the hearing yesterday when Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal questioned Bondi over her connections to a law firm involved in a merger that is being scrutinized right now, by the Justice Department, effectively alleging that there might be something inappropriate there. She went after him on the decades-old allegations that he lied about his military service in Vietnam. She responded to questions about the law firm and the merger and ethics there by saying, "I can't believe you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service. How dare you? I'm a career prosecutor. Don't you ever challenge my integrity." Now, again, traditionally, an attorney general might say, "I have no concerns there," or certain issues there are being addressed by a third party. But Bondi, again, in this case, pushing back very hard. Another issue that came up during the hearing yesterday, questions about the extent to which the White House has politicized the Justice Department, pushing specifically President Trump's agenda. She was pressed on a social media post Trump made a couple weeks ago. We told you about this, where he directed her in the Truth Social post, which began with Pam, in which he called for the prosecution of 3 of his political enemies, including former FBI Director James Comey, writing, "We can't delay any longer. This is killing our reputation and credibility." Within days, Comey was indicted by the Eastern District of Virginia. Senator Amy Klobuchar, the Democrat from Minnesota, questioning her about whether she felt pressure from those Trump Truth Social posts.
Do you consider that a directive to the Justice Department?
Senator Klobuchar, President Trump is the most transparent president in American history. And I don't think he said anything that he hasn't said for years.
Another topic that came up yesterday, the Jeffrey Epstein files. Remember, Bondi in the spring made a whole bunch of promises about the fact that the files were on her desk, that she was going to release them, ultimately released very little in terms of what was promised. And there have been reports recently that any Jeffrey Epstein file that had Trump mentioned in them, remember Trump and Epstein were friends for more than a decade, were flagged. Well, she was questioned about that yesterday. And instead of clearly answering and denying whether the White House was involved in directing her regarding the Epstein files, she instead attacked Democrats who asked her about Epstein, saying, "Well, have you taken money from a man named Reid Hoffman? He is a major Democratic donor who Republicans have said is linked to Jeffrey Epstein. They did have a meeting several years ago, but Hoffman has not been accused of anything." Nonetheless, that was the core of her response to any Epstein file questions yesterday. She pushed back on Democrats, saying, "What are your connections to Jeffrey Epstein?" Now, Republicans were also present yesterday. They also sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And for the most part, a number of them focused instead on former President Biden. Revelations this week that the Biden Justice Department used special counsel Jack Smith as he was prosecuting Trump last year to allegedly spy on Republicans was at the core of what a number of the Republicans brought up yesterday. There was a release of documents Monday showing Jack Smith's investigation obtained call records through a court order of 8 Senate Republicans as he was investigating Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election and who he was calling during that time, as well as the January 6th Capitol Hill riot. Republicans framing this as spying. Now, as far as we know here, it does not rise to the level of spying. What we have learned is this was a request from the special counsel for records that cover January 4th to January 8th, 2021. Those key dates around January 6th. That was a time when Trump was phoning a lot of lawmakers as he attempted to keep hold of power, attempt to overturn the election, as he was getting them to oppose locking in President Biden there on January 6th of 2021. Now, there's no indication from what has been released so far that the lawmakers were the targets of an investigation or were being spied on by any sense of the imagination. The only evidence so far is that investigators want to know who Trump was interacting with over those 4 days around January 6th, 2021. Nonetheless, Republicans were apoplectic about it yesterday, saying this was worse than Watergate. Pam Bondi talking about it yesterday, saying she has spoken with the FBI Director, Kash Patel, quote, at length about it, but she can't discuss further details as of now. Now, before we leave the story, I did mention the National Guard troops and the deployment. That's a story we've been covering for the past couple of weeks. I want to update you on that. Over the last 36 hours, several hundred Texas National Guard troops have arrived in the Chicago area. The White House says the Guard members are there to protect federal property, including an ICE facility in the Chicago area, and in response to what it calls, quote, violent riots and lawlessness in Chicago. There have been a number of protests that have escalated specifically around that ICE facility in one Chicago neighborhood. Now, Texas Guard troops have arrived at a military facility in the Chicago area. They are receiving training regarding crowd control and expect to be deployed in the coming days. Democrats in the state, including the governor, the mayor of Chicago, say this is completely unconstitutional. This is an attempt to militarize the city, escalate things further in Chicago. The state of Illinois, the city of Chicago have both sued the administration, trying to stop the mobilization. There is a hearing set for that case tomorrow that we will be watching very closely. Now to another story we're watching out of Washington that's having an impact across the country. Day 8 of the government shutdown is today, and there is no end in sight. A few headlines we're tracking on this. Yesterday, Trump suggesting that some of the hundreds of thousands of furloughed government workers may not automatically get retroactive pay once the government reopens. Trump saying during a meeting yesterday, it really depends on who you're talking about, but for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. The implication there is that he might only take care of supporters. He wasn't very clear about it, and it is notable because after the government's last shutdown in late 2018, early 2019, the last time Trump was president, there was a law passed that guaranteed that all federal workers will receive back pay for any period of time when there's a gap in funding. So basically, the law states right now that any government worker during a shutdown will get back pay. So that is why some people found that comment from Trump surprising. You did hear from Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, including Speaker Mike Johnson, top Republican, close ally of Trump, who said he supports back pay for all government workers and praised the, quote, extraordinary Americans who serve the federal government. So not clear that anything will change there, despite the Trump remarks yesterday. A reminder that this government shutdown started last week after Senate Democrats refused to agree to a Republican-backed spending bill that Republicans never negotiated with Democrats. Democrats saying it's going to result in major cuts to health care benefits, and it's going to result in millions of Americans potentially getting kicked off of health insurance, unable to afford health insurance. There are a whole bunch of health insurance subsidies related to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that are set to expire at the end of this year. Democrats are holding firm, saying, Republicans, you must negotiate with us on these. This is a very popular issue for Americans. Most Americans believe they already spend too much on healthcare insurance. And in the coming weeks, many of us will be learning how much more our premiums will be going up next year. And so Democrats feel that they have the wind at their back here, trying to force Republicans to negotiate here. Because, again, the Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. They haven't had to negotiate with Democrats for the most part this year. Democrats have gotten very little of what they want because they don't have the keys to power. And that is why Democrats saw an opportunity here with this government shutdown to actually force a debate on a couple topics like health insurance subsidies. Also, cuts to Medicaid they want reversed that came in the Republican One Big Beautiful Bill over the summer. So they are pushing their case there. And there now appears to be some cracks on the Republican side among the unlikely allies Democrats gained in recent days. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the staunch, hard right conservative out of Georgia, saying something does need to be done about health insurance costs. And you have been seeing a few Republicans who realize that some of these health insurance subsidies, these Obamacare health insurance subsidies that Democrats are fighting for, benefit a number of their constituents. So Democrats hope they can continue to keep this fight alive. And it comes as Republicans in Congress are desperately working to keep their ranks unified. They want to reopen the government without making any concessions to Democrats. And you did see Speaker Johnson yesterday sort of dismissing Marjorie Taylor Greene there. So not much progress, at least so far. We will watch in the coming days if they can strike a deal here. But with the lack of progress in Washington, we are starting to see more and more of the real world effects. On Tuesday, for the second time in 2 days, a significant airport in the U.S. had an empty air traffic control tower. We told you on Monday it was Burbank, California. On Tuesday, it was Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville International Airport, as of 7 p.m. last night, had an empty air traffic control tower. Pilots planning to fly into the airport and out of the airport had to contact a regional air traffic control facility in Memphis to get clearance before entering the Nashville airspace. That's similar to what happened in Burbank, California, in Southern California on Monday. As pilots had to contact the regional facility, it led to numerous delays at those airports that then ricocheted and created a domino effect across the country. There have been delays from New Jersey to Chicago to Texas to California. And this is all happening because air traffic controllers, among those federal employees that have to work, they're deemed essential employees, but they're not being paid. Many of them already stressed out. We've talked about how short-staffed they are, how stressful it is to be an air traffic controller on a good day. And so the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, saying he's seeing a tick up in sick calls. Since the shutdown started, a number of the air traffic controllers worried about paying their bills, especially as they expect in the coming weeks not to be paid, even though many of them are working mandatory overtime, 6-day weeks. We've talked about how for many air traffic controllers, it's 6-day weeks with 10 to 12-hour shifts a day. Well, they're going to miss their first full paycheck in the coming weeks here. So it's added a lot of stress to them, many of them calling in sick. And we're going to see more and more of this. As of Tuesday afternoon, there were more than 3,000 delays across the country, some of them attributed to air traffic control shortage. On Monday, there were more than 6,000 delays, including nearly half of the flights out of O'Hare Airport delayed on Monday. A reminder, the last shutdown, one of the reasons it finally ended, well, enough air traffic controllers were calling out sick that it led to major delays across the country in January of 2019. One of the reasons the two sides had to come together on a compromise after a nearly month-long shutdown. All right, now time for today's speed read, starting with a very closely watched political race out of Virginia that is dominating now national headlines. This is from the Washington Post. A political bombshell erupted in Virginia this week when text messages sent by Democratic Attorney General nominee Jay Jones went public. These text messages are triggering fierce backlash and calls from Republicans for him to drop out. So this is a text exchange from back in 2022 that went public this week. Jones was texting with a Republican colleague in the House of Delegates in Virginia and effectively fantasizing about violently killing then Virginia House Speaker Todd Gilbert. Jones wrote in a text message that he wished he could put 2 bullets to the head of the then Republican House Speaker. He added in the text message, if Gilbert, Adolf Hitler, and the infamous Cambodian dictator Pol Pot were the 3 choices, and he only had 2 bullets, Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. According to the screenshot, he then wrote, spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. He then went on to suggest that Gilbert's wife should have to watch their children die in order to influence his views on gun control policy. And add to that, the Republican colleague who Jones was texting with, her name is Carrie Coyner, also said that Jones suggested in a phone call with her in 2020 that a few police officers dying might stop them from killing other people. Now, Jones denies the police comments, does not deny the comments about Hitler, Gilbert, or suggesting that Gilbert's children should have to die in order to change his views on gun control policy. He's acknowledged those texts. He's now issued a full apology saying he's, quote, embarrassed, ashamed, and sorry. He's taking, quote, full responsibility. And he also said he reached out to Gilbert and his family directly to apologize. So far, Democrats in Virginia are condemning the text messages, several saying they're out of character for him. They've known him for a while, and they're surprised that Jones texted that, though they, again, condemn the text messages, but they're still supporting him to be the next Attorney General for the state of Virginia. No major calls right now by major state Democrats for Jones to call out, though he is continuing to face backlash. He was forced, according to Axios, to cancel a fundraiser that he had set for tomorrow night in Virginia. This is a key period of time. Election day is coming up in the next couple of weeks. Meanwhile, Republicans, including President Trump and state Republican leaders, are demanding that Jones withdraw from the race for Attorney General, that these text messages go way too far, especially in this climate of political violence, speaking just a few weeks after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They have now bought $1.5 million in campaign ads to inform voters about the controversy, and they're pressuring Democrats right now to not only condemn Jones, but call for him to drop out of the race. We'll see what happens here in the coming weeks. But Jones insists that, at least as of right now, he will continue the campaign, framing the election as a fight over the people of Virginia rather than a personal controversy. Election day is just a couple of weeks away in Virginia, the first week of November. Virginia, one of the few states and localities that has elections in an odd-numbered year. So in 2025, we will be seeing elections. We will be tracking elections in just a couple of weeks in Virginia, in New Jersey, as well as the mayor's race in New York City. All of those, the most prominent elections we're watching right now this year. All right, from the Mo News Instagram account, we mentioned yesterday that the Supreme Court is back in session for the year. They heard one of the most closely watched cases yesterday. The Supreme Court now appears set to rule against Colorado's ban on conversion therapy for minors. During arguments on Tuesday, the justices debated whether Colorado's ban on conversion therapy, which is the controversial treatment that aims to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity violates the First Amendment right to free speech. This is a case that was brought forth by a licensed counselor named Casey Childs. She is a Christian who wanted to engage in what's called faith-informed talk therapy with patients seeking to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. Colorado is among 24 states, along with DC, that totally bans conversion therapy for minors. This is a hugely controversial therapy. Many people have come out of it saying they were severely traumatized, forced into it as children, particularly by religious parents. When they came out as gay, they were forced to go through conversion therapy to try to be convinced that they were actually straight. So a number of states over the course of the past couple decades have banned the therapy. So this case was brought forth as a First Amendment issue regarding free speech and freedom of religion. But advocates for the law say this is more about a regulation on how healthcare professionals interact with their patients. But notably, most of the court's conservatives, as well as at least one liberal, Elena Kagan, based on their questioning yesterday, seem to view conversion therapy as one primarily of free speech. One thing that's come to light is there is a concern that if the court actually upheld the ban on conversion therapy, that precedent could then be used in more red states to ban treatment for gender dysphoria or people who don't think they're in the right body, meaning it could potentially allow for laws banning therapy around transitioning and various treatments for trans people. Now, the Colorado Solicitor General yesterday, Shannon Stevenson, defended the ban, arguing that conversion therapy has proven to be ineffective by medical professionals over the last century. She says there's been no major study showing that it is effective, and that ultimately medical guidance, not free speech laws, should dictate whether conversion therapy should be legal. Conservative Justice Samuel Alito yesterday trying to poke holes in Stevenson's argument by citing examples of when medical consensus in the past was wrong. He made a point of asking, wasn't there a time when there were many medical professionals who thought that every child with Down syndrome should immediately be put in an institution? Stevenson sort of paused and claimed to not know much about that, and then went back to reinforcing that ultimately, in this specific case, the medical establishment is clear that conversion therapy doesn't work. This is one of a number of cases we'll be watching the Supreme Court this term. The decisions for some of the major cases, including this one, are expected in June. All right, from the Wall Street Journal, the price of gold has surpassed $4,000 an ounce for the first time this week. The rise in gold prices signals an investor rush into an alternative asset at a time when there are increasing concerns about the outlook for the U.S. economy. The price of gold has surged this year more than it has during previous crises in the U.S. The more than 50% increase in 2025 has outpaced rallies we saw during the pandemic, as well as during the 2008-2009 recession. You actually need to go back to the 1970s and that era of hyperinflation to see a surge in gold prices this significant. Now, the rush to gold typically indicates that investors are nervous about the state of the economy, and it comes amid the tariffs, inflation, questions about the independence of the Federal Reserve, and an overall feeling of a lack of stability in the U.S. government. Because oftentimes, when there's sort of market questions about inflation and assets being too expensive, the move is to go into treasury bonds. But given concerns about the U.S. government these days, the usual buyers, both domestically as well as foreign governments, are buying gold instead. The U.S. dollar, by one measure, has had its weakest first half of the year in more than 5 decades. Now, gold has been surging for a number of years. Actually, if you go back to the beginning of the pandemic, it's up about 3x since COVID hit. And that, of course, includes the super spike this year. The latest rally around gold started in August. That's when Fed Chair Jay Powell signaled that the central bank was ready to begin cutting interest rates in an economy with low unemployment and above target inflation. And it's notable because you see a bunch of stocks at record highs too. This AI crazed stock market continues to break records. But instead, and so you see at the same time investors hedging their bets here with gold. And with this modern day gold rush, it has driven a number of Americans to be selling off old jewelry, to be melted down and traded for cash as gold becomes more expensive here. Before we leave this business item, I also want to mention there's another asset that hit a record this week, much riskier than gold. Bitcoin hit a record high, $122,000 for one Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin, of course, fluctuates much more significantly than gold, but that's another alternative asset we've seen a major surge in this year. All right, from Variety Magazine, a major controversy around country singer Bryan. You may have heard the snippet that was released recently of an upcoming song that includes lyrics where he criticizes ICE officers and immigration raids. The song has drawn a lot of criticism from conservative fans, as well as the White House and the Homeland Security Department. So Zach Bryan, who's a singer but also a military veteran, recently published a 1-minute snippet of the song that he calls Bad News. It was published on Instagram and YouTube, in which he sings a couple controversial lyrics. Take a listen.
And ice is gonna come bust down your door. Try to build a house, no one builds no more. But I got a telephone. Kids are all scared and all alone. The bar stop bumping the rock, stop rolling, my middle fingers rising, and I won't stop showing. Got some bad news, the fading of a red, white, and blue.
The line there, ICE is going to come bust down your door. And then he goes on to say later in the clip, got some bad news, the fading of the red, white, and blue. Now, since President Trump's election, ICE has escalated its immigration raids across major U.S. cities. We've been talking about it here on the podcast as well as on our other channels. It's led to thousands of arrests, the detainment of tens of thousands of people, as well as the deportation of tens of thousands. Several prominent celebrities have been speaking out: Olivia Rodrigo, Bad Bunny, Sabrina Carpenter, and others, though it is more uncommon for country stars to criticize Republicans, given that there's a large conservative fan base for country music. That said, Zach Bryan, considered much less conservative than other country stars, the White House replying with a statement yesterday that's sort of a mashup of Zach Bryan's song titles. This is what White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson sent out. Quote, while Zach Bryan wants to open the gates to criminal illegal aliens and has condemned heroic ICE officers, something in the orange tells me a majority of Americans disagree with him and support President Trump's great revival. Godspeed, Zach. Now, Zach Bryan rose to fame back in 2017. He released his first 2 albums while serving in the U.S. Navy. He is no stranger to controversy. He's been accused of emotionally abusing an ex-partner, been described as very difficult to work with. There was an arrest a couple years ago where he was not cooperating with a police officer. But he's pushing back on the pushback here. He responded late Tuesday on Instagram, writing in part that he posted this song snippet 3 months ago, and says this only goes to show you how divisive things have gotten in America. He claimed that when you hear the rest of the song, you will understand the full context, that he hits both sides of the aisle. He goes on to say, I love this country and everyone more than anything. We need to find a way back from this divisiveness. So we will look out for the full song from Zach Bryan. I imagine there's a lot of pressure to release it in the coming days here. All right, staying with music here for our final story, though much less controversial, from NBC News. Taylor Swift finally explaining this week during an appearance on The Tonight Show why she is reluctant to appear in the Super Bowl halftime show. Remember, there was a rumor earlier this year that she was a contender to perform in the halftime show, something that even the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, didn't deny. Ultimately, Jay-Z and his Rock Nation production team struck a deal with Bad Bunny, who we told you recently is going to be the performer at next February's Super Bowl. Nonetheless, Taylor Swift promoting her new album, Life of a Showgirl, this week. She was on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and she got a question from Jimmy Fallon about the Super Bowl. She says that the main issue for her is that her fiancé, Travis Kelce, plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, has played in several recent Super Bowls, and during football season, she's super stressed and super focused on Travis. Take a listen to Taylor's response to a question about her interest or lack of interest in performing in the halftime show.
Jay-Z has always been very good to me.
Yes.
Our teams are really close. It's like they sometimes will call and say, how does she feel about,
yeah.
And that's not like an official offer or an official or like a conference room conversation.
It's just a
like
feeling
our teams
out.
are really close. How does she feel about it in general? And we're always able to like tell him the truth, which is that like I am in love with a guy who does that sport on that actual field. Like, that is violent chess. That is gladiators without swords. That is dangerous. Wow. I am, the whole season, I am locked in on what that man is doing on the field. Can you imagine if, like, he's out there every single week, like, putting his life on the line, doing this very dangerous, very high-pressure, high-intensity sport, and I'm like, I wonder what my choreo should be.
Like, oh my gosh, honey, let me have one thing.
I
Let me have one thing.
I think we should do 2 verses of Shake It Up into Blank Space, into Cruel Summer would be great.
It's funny, as you listen to that last part, it sounds like Taylor has actually given it some thought. Shake It Up into Blank Space, into Cruel Summer. Nonetheless, it doesn't appear there will be a halftime show anytime soon. Of course, she has a wedding to be planning in the coming months. As for the Kansas City Chiefs appearing in the Super Bowl, not looking very good for them to make another appearance this year. Right now, the Chiefs, I should mention, are 2-3. Not looking like they even might make the playoffs. But, of course, a Super Bowl halftime show does take months of prep, the season. And she, of course, is a very loyal attendee of all of the games. So she's sensitive to all of that. So we will look forward to Bad Bunny's halftime show in February. And then maybe a future year, maybe once Travis retires, Taylor will play a Super Bowl halftime show. All right, we end here, of course, as always, with On This Day in History. We begin with a significant day in history for the town I grew up in, Chicago. On this day in 1871, October 8th, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire starts, allegedly in Patrick and Catherine O'Leary's barn. Legend has it that a cow kicked over a lantern in the barn, leading to a massive fire that would kill 300 people, leave 100,000 people homeless, and burn down most of the city of Chicago. Somebody later reported that they made up that story, but not before the legend became truth for many folks. And so to this day, 150 plus years later, we're still blaming the cow in Mrs. O'Leary's barn. On this day in 1945, the patent was filed for the microwave by the Raytheon Company. It is now, of course, a kitchen staple in all of our kitchens. But at the time it was invented, it was solely being used for military uses. This all goes to an inventor, a Raytheon employee at the time named Percy Spencer. He was working on a machine called the magnetron, which emitted a microwave signal. As he was working on this for various military uses, he found that while he was experimenting with the magnetron, it was melting a chocolate bar in his pocket. He was a big fan of the Payday candy bar, and as he was messing with the microwave radiation, he kept finding that his candy bars were getting melted. He then tried other consumables like unpopped popcorn, cold food, water, and he found that microwaves could cook or reheat through materials like wax paper, plastic, and glass. So ultimately, Raytheon goes to file the patent on this day in history for the microwave. The first one, by the way, I should mention, a 750-pound appliance they called a Radarange, which was installed in a nuclear-powered cargo ship. Eventually, they would make it slightly lighter and slightly more practical for the rest of us. All right, we end with a bit of TV history. On this day in 1984, 41 years ago, the beloved children's show, The Elephant Show. Many of us might remember this from the 80s and 90s. The Elephant Show premiered on this day with Sharon, Lois, and Bram. I remember this very well because my brother was a huge fan of The Elephant Show. Emily, I know you listen to the podcast. Tell Yoni that I gave The Elephant Show with Sharon, Lois, and Bram a shout out today. And finally, Friday Night Lights premieres on this day in 2004. I should mention Friday Night Lights, the film. 2 years later, the TV series would premiere. And that's when we all fell in love with Eric Taylor, Coach Taylor, Tammy Taylor, much more importantly. And we should mention Lila Garrity, Minka Kelly, one of our Mo News followers over on the Instagram account. All right, I want to thank you for listening to another edition of the Mo News podcast. We expect Jill to be back tomorrow, so it's not just me talking to myself, talking to a microphone. It'll be nice to have my partner in crime back, but thanks for rolling with us this week as the news unfolds. A reminder that the coverage continues 24/7 over on the Instagram page. And there's also an afternoon Substack for free that gives you the rundown of what took place every day. So you get the podcast in the morning, the newsletter in the afternoon. You can subscribe over at mo.news/newsletter, mo.news/newsletter. And if you want extra content, analysis, weekend content, our workshops, our Slack channel, and access to the Mo News web app where you get 24/7 coverage, well, you got to join Mo News Premium for that. It's also a way to support us here at Mo News. You can join Mo News Premium over at mo.news/premium. Again, support independent news and get access to all of our extra analysis, insights, and the Mo News Premium community. That's just $9 a month or $99 a year. mo.news/premium. All right, everybody. I'll see you back here tomorrow.
They can listen to Mo News the app.